Captain Jiho Park was drinking his morning coffee when the stars started disappearing. He stood on the bridge of the mining ship New Seoul, watching through the main window as something massive blocked out the distant suns. The coffee cup slipped from his fingers and shattered on the metal floor. What he saw next would haunt his dreams forever. Ships. Huge alien ships that looked like they were made from living flesh and bone. They had no straight lines, no clean metal surfaces. Instead, they pulsed with a sickly green light that made Jiho's stomach turn. The largest one was the size of a small moon. "Captain," his communications officer called out, her voice shaking. "We're getting a message. It's coming from everywhere at once." The alien voice that filled the bridge was like grinding metal mixed with screaming wind. It spoke perfect human language, but each word felt wrong, like it was being forced through a throat not meant for speech. "Human insects, you have been marked for harvest. Your species has 72 hours to surrender all colonies and prepare for processing. Resistance will result in immediate consumption. The hunt begins now." Jiho grabbed the communication panel. "This is Captain Park of the mining vessel New Seoul. Who are you? What do you want?" Cold laughter echoed through the ship's speakers. "We are the Vorthak. We have consumed 47 species across this galaxy. You will be 48. Your flesh will feed our war machines. Your bones will strengthen our ships. Your children will know only darkness." The transmission cut off, leaving the bridge in terrible silence. Far away on Earth, Admiral Sumin Lee was having a very different morning. She sat in her office deep underground, watching dozens of screens that showed every human colony in space. Red warning lights were flashing everywhere. Her assistant rushed in. "Admiral, we're getting emergency calls from the outer colonies. Something's attacking them." Suman had been waiting for this day for 20 years. She pressed a button on her desk and spoke into a microphone. "All stations, this is Admiral Lee. Begin Protocol Omega preparations. Move to Phase 1 immediately." "Ma'am," her assistant asked, "what's Protocol Omega?" Suman smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. "Something we hoped we'd never need." On the agricultural world of New Busan, Dr. Hyunwoo Kim was in his laboratory when the sky turned red. He ran outside and looked up to see massive organic ships dropping from the clouds like diseased birds. They landed in the fields around his research station, crushing the crops he'd spent years developing. The ships opened up like giant flowers, but instead of petals, they revealed rows of sharp teeth. Creatures poured out. They walked on too many legs and had eyes like black holes. They moved with purpose, spreading across the farmland and beginning to eat everything. Hyunwoo watched in horror as the aliens consumed not just the plants, but the soil itself, the rocks, even the air seemed to get thicker and harder to breathe. They were turning his beautiful world into something dead and gray. He grabbed his research files and ran to his emergency shuttle. As he lifted off, he saw the aliens had found the main colony. The screams coming through his radio made him turn off all communications. In space, Commander Minho Choi stood inside the flesh walls of his Vorthak command ship. Unlike the others of his kind, he had learned to think beyond the hive mind that connected all Vorthak. This made him valuable as a scout and hunter. He studied the reports flowing in from attack groups across human space. The pattern was always the same. Humans ran or tried to fight with their weak weapons, then died quickly. Their colonies fell in hours. Their ships broke apart like toys, but something felt wrong. Minho had hunted many species before. Usually by now, the prey would be sending desperate messages begging for mercy. They would offer their children, their resources, anything to survive. But the humans were different. Yes, their outer colonies had fallen easily. But from the inner systems, from Earth itself, there was only silence. Not the silence of the dead, but the silence of something waiting. Minho reported to the Vorthak High Command through the mental link all his people shared. The humans are not behaving as expected. They should be panicking. They should be fleeing deeper into their space. Instead, they seem to be preparing something. The response came back like ice in his mind. All prey species make final preparations before death. Continue the hunt. Consume their worlds. Drive them back to their home planet so we may feed on their entire civilization at once. But Minho wasn't convinced. He had seen how other species acted when faced with extinction. Fear made them predictable. The humans weren't showing fear. They were showing something else. Something that made his hunting instincts scream warnings. Back on the New Sol, Captain Jiho was following emergency evacuation procedures. Like all mining ship captains, he knew the route back to Earth by heart. But as his ship jumped through hyperspace, he noticed something odd. Other ships were joining them. Lots of ships. Mining vessels like his, research ships, even passenger transports. But they weren't running in panic like refugees should. They were moving in formation, like they were following a plan. Jiho opened a secure channel to one of the nearby ships. "This is Captain Park. Are you following evacuation Route 7? "Negative," came the reply. "We're following Route 7 Alpha. Check your sealed orders, Park. Time to find out what we've really been doing out here." Sealed orders? Jiho had never heard of any sealed orders. He went to his ship's safe and found a package he'd never seen before. Inside were documents that made his hands shake as he read them. The New Sol wasn't just a mining ship. Hidden behind false walls were weapon systems, communication arrays, and armor plating. His crew wasn't just miners and engineers. According to these papers, they were all trained military personnel who had been living undercover for years. At the bottom of the documents was a message from Admiral Lee. "If you're reading this, the day we prepared for has come. Welcome to the real Colonial Defense Force. Time to show these aliens why you don't hunt humans." Jiho looked around his bridge with new eyes. His communications officer was checking hidden weapon controls. His navigator was plotting attack routes instead of escape routes. His chief engineer was powering up systems that weren't supposed to exist. For the first time since the aliens had appeared, Jiho smiled. The Vorthak thought they were hunting helpless prey. They had no idea they had just walked into the most carefully planned trap in galactic history. The hunt was about to become very interesting. The Vorthak fleet approached Earth expecting to find a frightened world with basic defenses. What they found instead was impossible. Commander Minho Choi watched from his command ship as his sensors tried to make sense of what surrounded the human homeworld. There should have been simple satellites, maybe a few orbital platforms. Instead, his screens showed massive structures everywhere. Space stations that had looked like peaceful research facilities were dropping their outer shells like snakes shedding skin. Underneath were weapons bigger than most Vorthak ships. Asteroid mining operations were revealing themselves as heavily armed fortresses. Even the communication satellites were showing weapon signatures. "This cannot be correct," Minho said to his ship's brain, the living computer that controlled all Vorthak vessels. "Scan again." "Scans are accurate," the ship replied in its wet, bubbling voice. "Human defensive capabilities are far beyond initial estimates. Recommend immediate withdrawal and reassessment." But the Vorthak way was to always attack. Retreat was not permitted. Minho opened the link to his fleet. "All ships, begin standard assault pattern. Target the largest defensive platforms first." Deep inside Cheyenne Mountain, Director Yuna Han sat in a room that officially didn't exist. Around her, hundreds of technicians worked at computers that monitored every corner of the solar system. She had been waiting for this moment for 30 years. "Director," her aide called out, "Vorthak ships are moving into attack formation." Yuna nodded and pressed a red button on her desk. Across the solar system, things that had been hiding for decades came to life. On Luna, Professor Soo-Young Park watched as her research institute transformed around her. Walls slid away to reveal the largest sensor array ever built. Computer systems that had been disguised as climate monitoring equipment suddenly showed their true purpose, tracking enemy ships across multiple dimensions. "Soo-Young," came her brother's voice over the communicator. "Is that really you in there?" She smiled. Jiho was out there somewhere with the fleet, probably just learning that his mining ship was actually a warship. "Hello, brother. Welcome to the real Colonial Defense Force." How long has this been going on? Jiho asked. Since before you were born, Suyong replied. Remember when humanity first found signs of alien life? The government said they were just studying it. They lied. We've been preparing for war ever since. The truth was bigger than most humans knew. 50 years ago, a damaged alien ship had crashed in the Pacific Ocean. The crew was dead, but their technology was intact. Human scientists had learned terrible things from that wreckage. They learned that the galaxy was full of aggressive species that destroyed younger civilizations. They learned about the Vorthak and their history of genocide. Most importantly, they learned that Earth's location had already been discovered, so humanity had made a choice. They would prepare in secret while appearing completely harmless. Colonel Taehyun Jang commanded what everyone thought was Asteroid Mining Station Alpha 7. In reality, it was the most powerful weapons platform in human space. His miners were actually elite soldiers who had trained for this day their entire lives. All right, people, Taehyun announced over the station's intercom. Drop the act. Combat stations now. The asteroid's surface cracked open like an egg. Hidden inside was a massive railgun that could punch holes through planets. Taehyun watched as his targeting computer locked onto the nearest Vorthak ship. For every human they've killed, he whispered and fired. The railgun's projectile moved at a significant fraction of light speed. The Vorthak ship's organic armor, which had protected it against every weapon it had ever faced, simply vaporized. The creature ship screamed across all radio frequencies as it died. Minho Choi felt that death through the hive-mind link all Vorthak shared. The pain and shock hit him like a physical blow. In 3,000 years of hunting, no Vorthak ship had ever been destroyed so quickly or completely. Impossible, he said. Their weapons readings showed primitive projectile systems. Scans were deceived, his ship replied, and for the first time, Minho heard something like fear in its voice. Human weapons are using unknown technology. Our armor provides no protection. More Vorthak ships died as hidden human weapons platforms revealed themselves throughout the solar system. Each death sent waves of agony through the hive mind, something the Vorthak had never experienced during a hunt. On Earth's surface, Admiral Suman Lee stood in the real command center, watching displays that showed the battle unfolding. She opened a channel to all human forces. This is Admiral Lee to all units. You've spent your lives pretending to be civilians, miners, researchers, and traders. Today, you get to be what you really are. Soldiers defending humanity's future. Show them what happens when you hunt the wrong species. The response was immediate. Ships that had spent decades disguised as cargo haulers revealed themselves as destroyers. Scientists who had published papers on peaceful research activated weapons that could crack moons in half. Even the civilian population began moving to combat positions they had been secretly training for since childhood. Captain Ji-Won Lim commanded what appeared to be a medical frigate called the Mercy's Hand. She had spent 20 years pretending to deliver supplies to remote colonies. Her ship's real cargo had been very different. Medical bay, prepare for surgery, she announced to her crew, using code words they had rehearsed for decades. The ship's hull split open to reveal quantum torpedo launchers. These weapons didn't just destroy targets in normal space, they could hit ships hiding in other dimensions, something no other species had ever developed. Ji-Won selected a Vorthak command vessel and fired. The torpedo seemed to disappear, then reappeared inside the enemy ship. The explosion tore the creature apart. From within, patient successfully treated, she reported, smiling grimly. The Vorthak fleet was falling apart. Their advantage had always been surprise and overwhelming force. They would appear suddenly, destroy everything quickly, then move on. But the humans were not only fighting back, they were winning. Minho Choi realized something that chilled him to his core. The humans hadn't just been preparing defenses. They had been studying Vorthak tactics, learning their weaknesses, developing specific weapons to counter their strengths. This wasn't a desperate last stand by a primitive species. This was a carefully planned counterattack by an enemy that knew exactly what it was fighting. Retreat, he commanded his fleet. Full withdrawal to minimum safe distance. But as the surviving Vorthak ships tried to flee, they found their escape. Routes blocked. Human ships appeared from hiding places throughout the outer solar system. They had been waiting, positioned perfectly to cut off any retreat. Dr. Yunji Seo, working from a laboratory hidden beneath the Seoul National University, activated her greatest creation. For 30 years, she had been developing a computer virus, designed specifically for biological neural networks like the Vorthak hive mind. The virus spread through Vorthak communication channels like wildfire. Ships began losing coordination as their shared consciousness fractured. Some Vorthak began attacking their own allies as the virus corrupted their connection to each other. Director Yuna Han watched the battle displays and allowed herself a small smile. The plan was working perfectly. Humanity's greatest achievement wasn't their technology or their weapons. It was their ability to keep a secret. For 50 years, millions of humans had lived double lives, keeping the greatest deception. In galactic history, they had built weapons while pretending to build homes. They had trained for war while appearing to live in peace. The Vorthak had hunted 47 species to extinction, but they had never faced anything like humanity. They had never hunted a species that had been hunting them right back. As the last Vorthak ships fled the solar system, broadcasting desperate warnings to their empire, Yuna Han opened a channel to the entire fleet. Attention all ships, Phase 1 is complete, Earth is secure, begin Phase 2 operations immediately. What's Phase 2? Someone asked. Yuna's smile became predatory. Now we hunt them. Fleet Admiral Dongyun Ko had been waiting his entire life for this moment. Standing on the bridge of what everyone had believed was the exploration vessel New Horizon, he watched as his ship's true nature revealed itself around him. The walls slid away to show weapon systems that shouldn't have existed. The peaceful exploration labs became tactical command centers. His crew of scientists removed their disguises and put on military uniforms they had kept hidden for decades. All ships, this is Admiral Ko, he broadcast to the fleet. Operation Payback is now active. We're taking the fight to them. Across 17 star systems, human ships that had been playing dead suddenly came alive. The Vorthak had expected their attack on Earth to succeed within hours. Instead, they found themselves fighting a war against an enemy that seemed to be everywhere at once. Captain Jiwon Lim piloted her ship through hyperspace, heading toward the Vorthak staging area in the Kepler system. Her medical frigate had shed its peaceful appearance completely. Now it looked like what it really was, a weapon designed to kill things that most people thought were unkillable. Captain, her weapons officer reported, we're detecting a Vorthak biofactory ship ahead. It's the size of a small planet. Jiwon smiled coldly. Biofactory ships were where the Vorthak processed their victims, turning captured species into fuel for their war machine. This one was probably full of prisoners from the colonies they had attacked. Load quantum phase torpedoes, she ordered. Let's give them a taste of real medicine. The torpedoes were humanity's greatest achievement in weapons technology. They could strike targets in multiple dimensions at once, bypassing any known defense. The Vorthak's organic armor, which had protected them for thousands of years, was useless against weapons that hit from inside their own ships. The biofactory exploded in a flash that could be seen from 3 star systems away. Thousands of Vorthak died instantly, their deaths screaming through the hive-mind connection that linked their entire species. On the Vorthak homeworld, Supreme Commander Kesithar felt every death like a knife to the brain. It was a creature older than human civilization, having overseen the extinction of 47 species over the millennia. Never once had it experienced fear. It was experiencing fear now. How is this possible? Kesthar demanded of its advisors. The humans showed no signs of advanced technology. Our scouts reported primitive weapons and scattered defenses. The humans deceived us, one advisor replied, its mental voice trembling. They have been preparing for this war for decades. Every mining operation, every research station, every trade mission was a military deception. Kesthar's fury sent waves of pain through the hive mind. Entire Vorthak colonies writhed in agony as their supreme leader raged. No species has ever successfully hidden their true capabilities from us. Our scans are perfect. Our intelligence gathering is flawless. Not anymore, the advisor whispered. Lieutenant Commander Seung-ho Nam had studied Vorthak tactics for 15 years, preparing for this day. Now he put that knowledge to use as he led a squadron of disguised fighters into the heart of Vorthak. Space. The aliens expected their enemies to fight defensively, to protect their homes and colonies while slowly retreating. Every species they had conquered had followed this pattern. But humans were different. Instead of defending, Seung-ho's forces attacked. They struck at Vorthak supply lines, destroyed their communication relays, and disappeared before the enemy could respond. It was guerrilla warfare on an interstellar scale, and the Vorthak had no idea how to counter it. Remember, Seung-ho told his pilots, we're not trying to win fair fights. We're trying to make them afraid. Hit fast, hit hard, and disappear. Make them jump at shadows. His fighters struck a Vorthak patrol fleet, destroyed half the ships in minutes, then vanished into hyperspace before reinforcements could arrive. The surviving Vorthak were left confused and terrified, reporting attacks by ghost ships that appeared from nowhere. Dr. Yoonji Seo watched from her hidden laboratory as her virus continued to spread through Vorthak networks. The biological computer virus was her life's work, designed specifically to target the neural connections that allowed the Vorthak to share consciousness. The virus didn't kill them. Instead, it isolated them, cutting individual Vorthak off from the hive mind that had guided their species for millennia. Suddenly, creatures that had never needed to think for themselves were forced to make independent decisions. The results were catastrophic for the Vorthak military. Ships began attacking their own allies. Fleet formations broke apart as individual commanders gave contradictory orders. Some Vorthak simply stopped fighting entirely, paralyzed by the sudden need to make choices without the guidance of the collective consciousness. It's working better than we hoped, Yoonji reported to Admiral Lee. The virus is adapting faster than they can develop immunity. Every Vorthak network it touches becomes unreliable. How long until it reaches their homeworld? Lee asked. At Dector, current spread rate 6 days. When it hits their central command systems, their entire empire will collapse into chaos. Commander Minho Choi was one of the few Vorthak who had learned to think independently, which was why he survived longer than most. But even he was struggling to understand what was happening to his species. The humans weren't just fighting back. They were winning. Vorthak fleets that had conquered entire civilizations were being destroyed by ships that had pretended to be garbage haulers and research vessels. Worse, the humans seemed to know everything about Vorthak tactics and weaknesses. They targeted bioships at their most vulnerable points. They used frequencies that disrupted Vorthak communication. They even deployed chemical weapons specifically designed to poison Vorthak atmosphere systems. They have been studying us, Minho realized with growing horror. For decades they have been learning everything about us while we learn nothing about them. He sent an emergency message to the High Command. We must retreat immediately. The humans are not prey. They are predators. They have been hunting us while we thought we were hunting them. The response came back harsh and dismissive. Impossible. No species has ever successfully hunted the Vorthak. Continue the attack. But Minho knew better. He had seen the fear in his people's eyes, felt the panic spreading through their shared consciousness. For the first time in their history, the Vorthak were the ones being hunted. Captain Won-ho Lee commanded the stealth destroyer Busan's Revenge, a ship that officially didn't exist. His mission was simple: find Vorthak command ships and destroy them before they knew he was there. The destroyer used technology reverse-engineered from that crashed alien ship 50 years ago, combined with human innovations that made it invisible to all known detection methods. Won-ho could park his ship next to a Vorthak fleet and remain completely undetected. Target acquired, his tactical officer reported. Vorthak command vessel, distance 12,000 kilometers. Fire all tubes, Won-ho ordered. The torpedoes struck before the Vorthak even knew they were under attack. The command ship, a massive bioconstruct that had coordinated the destruction of entire worlds, simply ceased to exist. Won-ho smiled grimly and moved on to the next target. The Vorthak had made one crucial mistake. They had assumed that humans would fight like all their previous victims. But humans didn't fight fair. They cheated. They lied. They prepared for decades and struck without warning. They studied their enemies and exploited every weakness. Most importantly, humans had something the Vorthak had never encountered before: the ability to hate with patience. Every human in the fleet remembered the colonies that had been destroyed, the people who had died in the first attacks. That hatred had been refined into cold professional determination to make the aliens pay for every life they had taken. Admiral Suman Lee received reports from across the battlefront. Vorthak forces were retreating on all fronts. Their communication networks were failing. Their fleets were breaking apart as the virus continued to spread through their systems, but she knew this was only the beginning. The Vorthak Empire was vast, with thousands of occupied worlds and trillions of enslaved beings. Defeating their invasion fleet was just the first step. "All commands, this is Admiral Lee," she broadcast to the human forces scattered across the galaxy. "Phase 2 is complete. The enemy is retreating. Begin Phase 3. Operations immediately." "What's Phase 3? Her aide asked. Lee's expression was grim but determined. "We follow them home. It's time to liberate every world they've ever conquered and make sure they can never hunt anyone ever again." The Vorthak had started this war thinking they were exterminating another weak species. Instead, they had awakened humanity's true nature. And humanity, when fully awakened, was the most dangerous predator the galaxy had ever known. Admiral Gyongsu-Oh had never expected to lead a liberation fleet. For 30 years, he had commanded what everyone believed was a deep space cargo hauler called the Heavy Lifter. Now his ship led a massive armada toward the Vorthak-occupied systems its true identity finally revealed. The Heavy Lifter wasn't just armed. It was a mobile command center designed to coordinate the liberation of entire star systems. Hidden in its cargo bays were supplies, weapons, and communication equipment for the resistance movements that were about to begin. "Admiral," his intelligence officer reported, "we're receiving signals from the Altair system. The local population is requesting assistance." Gyongsu smiled. The Altair system had been under Vorthak control for over 200 years. Its original inhabitants, a peaceful species called the Keth, had been enslaved and used as living batteries for Vorthak bioships. But now they were fighting back. "Set course for Altair," he ordered. "Time to even the odds." The Liberation Fleet dropped out of hyperspace to find a battle already in progress. Keth resistance fighters, using weapons and tactics taught to them by human infiltrators, were attacking Vorthak breeding facilities across 3 planets. It was a sight no one had ever seen before. Vorthak forces on the defensive. Their slaves turned into guerrilla fighters who knew exactly how to exploit their former master's weaknesses. Colonel Myeon Song had spent the last 5 years secretly training resistance groups across Vorthak space. Officially, she was an anthropologist, studying primitive cultures. In reality, she was teaching those primitive species how to fight back using human tactics. On the planet Keth Prime, she watched as her students put their lessons into practice. The Keth had learned to use their small size to their advantage, crawling through ventilation systems in Vorthak bioships and planting explosives in vital organs. "Remember," she told the Keth commander through her translator, "the Vorthak expect their enemies to fight with honor. We don't fight with honor. We fight to win." The Keith warrior clicked his mandibles in what passed for laughter among his species. "Your human ways are strange but effective. The bioships scream when we attack their nerve centers." Myeon nodded approvingly. The Vorthak had made their ships from living tissue, thinking it would make them stronger. But living tissue could feel pain, and creatures in pain couldn't think clearly. It was a weakness humans had been quick to exploit. Across the galaxy, similar scenes were playing out on dozens of worlds. Species that had been enslaved for centuries were suddenly fighting back with human weapons, human tactics, and most importantly, human fury. Captain Wonho Lee's stealth destroyer had become the stuff of nightmares for Vorthak commanders. His ship, the Busan's Revenge, seemed to appear from nowhere, destroy entire fleets and vanish before anyone could respond. But Wonho wasn't just destroying ships. He was freeing the prisoners inside them. "Target the bioship's digestive chambers," he ordered his weapons officer. Surgical strikes only. We want to free the prisoners, not kill them. The torpedoes punched precise holes in the living ship's hull. Immediately, escape pods began ejecting from the damaged vessel. Not Vorthak pods, but emergency rescue capsules that Wanho's ship had fired into the breach. Minutes later, his ship's cargo bay was full of rescued beings from a dozen different species. Most had been prisoners for years, some for decades. They all had the same look in their eyes, the desperate hope of people who had given up believing in rescue. "Welcome aboard," Wanho told them through the ship's translation system. "You're free now, and if you want to fight back, we'll teach you how." Commander Haeun Kim specialized in deep strike missions against targets that other commanders considered impossible. Her ship, disguised as a diplomatic vessel for 20 years, was equipped with weapons designed for one specific purpose: destroying Vorthak breeding worlds. The Vorthak reproduced by consuming the biomass of conquered species and converting it into new Vorthak warriors. Their breeding planets were massive biological factories where millions of enslaved beings were processed into new soldiers for the Empire. These worlds were considered untouchable. They were too well defended, too important to the Vorthak war machine. But Han had studied them for years, looking for weaknesses. "Approaching target," her navigator reported. "Vorthak Prime Breeding World 7. Population: approximately 50 million enslaved beings, 10 million Vorthak." "Begin atmospheric seeding," Haeun ordered. Her ship released clouds of microscopic machines into the planet's atmosphere. To any observer, it looked like harmless space dust. But the nanomachines were designed to target Vorthak biological systems specifically. Within hours, the breeding facilities began to fail. The biological computers that controlled the conversion process started dying. The Vorthak defenders found their own bodies beginning to shut down as the nanomachines attacked their nervous systems. But the enslaved populations were unaffected. The nanomachines had been programmed to ignore non-Vorthak biology completely. "This is Commander Kim to all resistance cells on Breeding World 7, she broadcast. "Your guards are down, your cages are unlocked. It's time to take your world back." Strategic analyst Jin-Wook Park worked from a mobile command center that followed the Liberation Fleet. His job was to coordinate intelligence from thousands of VE sources across the galaxy, building a complete picture of Vorthak capabilities and weaknesses. What he had learned was both encouraging and terrifying. The encouraging news was that the Vorthak Empire was collapsing faster than anyone had predicted. The virus Dr. Yunji had created was spreading through their networks like wildfire, cutting their fleets off from Central Command. Entire star systems were going dark as local Vorthak forces lost contact with their superiors. The terrifying news was the scale of what they were fighting. The Vorthak Empire controlled over 3,000 star systems. They had enslaved hundreds of species. Their military forces numbered in the trillions. "Admiral," Jin-Wook reported to the Fleet Command, "we've barely scratched the surface. Even with our advantages, this war could last decades." "Then we'd better get started," Admiral O replied grimly. But the humans had advantages beyond their technology and tactics. They had something the Vorthak had never encountered: the support of every species that had ever been conquered by the Empire. On the former Vorthak colony world of New Tursa, the local population had risen in rebellion within hours of the first human ships arriving. The colonists, descendants of a species conquered 300 years ago, had never forgotten their hatred of their oppressors. "We thought rescue would never come," their leader told Captain Jiwon Lim through a translator. "Our grandparents told stories of the time before the Vorthak, but we never believed freedom was possible." "It's possible now," Jiwon replied, "but you'll have to fight for it. We can give you weapons and training, but this is your world. You'll have to be the ones to take it back." The rebellion spread like fire through dry grass. Within days, Vorthak forces that had controlled New Tursa for centuries were trapped in their fortress cities, surrounded by guerrilla fighters who knew every inch of the planet's surface. The pattern repeated itself across the galaxy. As word spread that the Vorthak could be defeated, slave populations everywhere began to revolt. The empire that had seemed invincible for millennia was suddenly fighting wars on thousands of fronts simultaneously. Supreme Commander Kesithar felt the pain of every defeat through the hive-mind connection. Entire fleets were going silent. Breeding worlds were falling to rebellion. The virus in their communication networks was spreading faster than they could contain it. For the first time in its 1,000-year life, the ancient creature began to understand what its victims had felt: the helplessness, the despair, the knowledge that extinction was approaching and there was nothing that could stop it. But the humans weren't trying to exterminate the Vorthak. That became clear when human forces reached the first major Vorthak colony world and demanded its surrender rather than simply destroying it. "This is Admiral O to Vorthak Colony Defense Command," came the broadcast. "You have 1 hour to evacuate all enslaved populations and surrender your weapons. Comply, and you will be relocated to a designated system where you can rebuild your society. Resist, and you will share the fate you gave to 47 other species." It was an ultimatum no conquered species had ever been offered by the Vorthak: mercy, the chance to survive even after defeat. Some Vorthak forces chose to surrender. Others fought to the death, unable to believe that their enemies might show them more compassion than they had shown anyone else. But the message was clear to every enslaved species across the galaxy. Humanity wasn't just fighting to defeat the Vorthak. They were fighting to free everyone the Vorthak had ever conquered. Dr. Hyunwoo Kim, the researcher who had escaped from New Busan during the first attack, now found himself coordinating relief efforts for liberated worlds. He had seen the horror of Vorthak conquest firsthand. Now he was helping to heal the damage they had caused. "The psychological trauma alone will take generations to heal," he reported to the Liberation Command. "Some of these species have been enslaved for so long they've forgotten how to govern themselves." "Then we'll teach them," Admiral O replied. "Just like we taught them how to fight. Freedom isn't just about winning battles. It's AB." Supreme Admiral Boram Cho stood on the bridge of the flagship Soul's Fury, watching as the largest fleet in galactic history prepared for the final battle. Ships from hundreds of worlds surrounded her, species that had been enslaved by the Vorthak for centuries, now fighting side by side with their human liberators. The target ahead was Vorthak Prime, the original home world of the species that had terrorized the galaxy for 3,000 years. It was a planet-sized organism, its surface covered with living cities that pulsed with bioluminescent veins. At its heart was the central hive, where the Vorthak Emperor Gorthmak had ruled for longer than human civilization had existed. "All ships report ready," her communications officer announced. "Liberation fleet strength, 12,000 vessels from 237 species." Boram nodded grimly. The fleet was massive, but so were the defenses around Vorthak Prime. The planet was surrounded by millions of bioships, some large enough to be considered mobile worlds. The Vorthak had pulled back every surviving force they had to defend their home. This would be the largest space battle in galactic history. "Open a channel to all ship," Boram ordered. "This is Admiral Cho to all liberation forces. Today we end 3,000 years of tyranny. Today we ensure that no species will ever again suffer under Vorthak rule. All ships, attack formation. Let's finish this." Wing Commander Junho Kang piloted the prototype ship Soul's Fury, the most advanced vessel humanity had ever built. Unlike the other ships in the fleet, this one wasn't disguised as anything else. It had been built specifically for this battle, incorporating every piece of technology humanity had developed during their secret preparation. His ship's most important weapon wasn't a gun or torpedo. It was a device that could permanently sever the Vorthak hive-mind connection, reducing their entire civilization to confused individuals who couldn't coordinate their actions. "Target locked on the central hive," his weapons officer reported. "Distance 5 million kilometers and closing. Hold fire until we're in optimal range," Junho ordered. "We only get one shot at this." The space around Vorthak Prime erupted into the largest battle the galaxy had ever seen. Millions of ships engaged in combat that stretched across light years. Bioships that looked like floating nightmares clashed with vessels from every corner of known space. The liberated species fought with a fury born of centuries of oppression. Keth fighters swarmed around massive Vorthak biocruisers like angry insects. The crystalline ships of the Zephyr species used their energy weapons to slice through organic armor, that had seemed impenetrable for millennia. But the humans fought differently. They fought with cold, calculated precision, each ship knowing exactly where to strike for maximum effect. They had studied their enemy for 50 years, and it showed. Captain Jiwan Lim's medical frigate, now fully revealed as the warship it had always been, led a squadron of former civilian vessels into the heart of the Vorthak formation. Her quantum torpedoes struck at the nerve centers of bioships, causing them to writhe in agony before dying. "Remember," she told her squadron, "these ships can feel pain. Use that against them." Deep within the central hive, Emperor Gorthmak experienced terror for the first time in its ancient existence. The creature was older than most star systems, having grown to enormous size by consuming the life force of conquered worlds. Now it felt that life force being stripped away as its empire collapsed around it. Through the failing hive mind connection, it felt the deaths of millions of its children, every destroyed bioship, every fallen warrior, every lost world sent waves of agony through its consciousness. "Impossible," it whispered through vocal cords the size of subway tunnels. "We are the Vorthak. We are eternal. We are the devourers of worlds." But even as it spoke, more of its forces died. The humans and their allies were systematically destroying everything the Vorthak had built over millennia. Commander Minho Choi, one of the few Vorthak who had learned to think independently, found himself trapped in a dying bioship as human forces closed in. Around him, his crew writhed in confusion as the hive-mind connection weakened and failed. For creatures that had never needed to make individual decisions, the sudden isolation was devastating. Some simply shut down, unable to function without the constant guidance of the collective consciousness. Others lashed out blindly, attacking anything within reach. Minho realized that this was what their victims must have felt, the terror of facing extinction, the knowledge that their entire way of life was ending. For the first time, he understood the horror his species had inflicted on others. "This is Commander Minho Choi to any human vessels," he broadcast on all frequencies. "I surrender. I have information about Vorthak defenses that could save lives on both sides." The response came quickly. "This is Captain Park of the New Soul. Prepare to be boarded. Any hostile action will result in your immediate destruction." As human soldiers entered his ship, Minho saw something he had never expected to see in the eyes of his captors. Not hatred, but professional determination. They treated him as a defeated enemy, not as something to be tortured or consumed. It was more mercy than the Vorthak had ever shown anyone. The battle raged for hours, but the outcome was never in doubt. The Liberation Fleet had overwhelming numbers, superior tactics, and most importantly, the moral certainty that came from fighting for justice rather than conquest. Wing Commander Junho's ship finally reached optimal range of the central hive. "Firing hive mind disruptor," he announced. The weapon wasn't visible. It was a quantum field that interfered with the biological quantum entanglement that linked all Vorthak minds. But its effects were immediate and devastating. Across the battle zone, Vorthak forces suddenly stopped coordinating their attacks. Bioships began colliding with each other as their pilots lost the shared consciousness that had guided them for millennia. Some simply stopped fighting entirely, paralyzed by the sudden need to make decisions without the hive mind's guidance. In the central hive, Emperor Gorthmak felt its connection to its children severing like physical wounds. The ancient creature, which had existed as part of a collective consciousness for 3,000 years, suddenly found itself alone for the first time. What is happening to me?" it whispered, its massive voice echoing through the dying hive. President Suyon Nam had been watching the battle from Earth, but as the fighting wound down, she traveled to Vorthak Prime aboard the diplomatic vessel True Hope. As the leader of the United Earth government, she would be the one to accept the Vorthak surrender and decide their fate. The central hive had been damaged but not destroyed. Human forces had been careful to avoid unnecessary casualties, even among their enemies. It was a level of restraint that no other species in galactic history had ever shown in victory. Suyan walked through corridors lined with living tissue, accompanied by a small honor guard. The walls pulsed weakly around her like the heartbeat of a dying creature. In many ways, that's exactly what they were. At the heart of the hive, she found Emperor Gorthmak. The creature was enormous, easily the size of a city building, but it was clearly dying. Without the hive mind connection that had sustained it, the ancient being was finally showing its true age. Human, it whispered, its voice barely audible. Why do you not consume us? Why do you not take our worlds for your own expansion? This is the way of the strong. Suyan looked up at the dying emperor with something that might have been pity. Because we're not like you. We don't survive by destroying others. We survive by building something better. Impossible, Gorthmak replied. All species seek to dominate. All life consumes other life. This is the natural order. Maybe for you, Suyan said, but not for us. Admiral Suman Lee, who had coordinated humanity's defense from the beginning, now stood in what had once been the Vorthak's supreme command center. Around her, human technicians worked to disable the biological computers that had controlled an empire spanning thousands of worlds. Status report, she requested. All major Vorthak forces have surrendered or been destroyed. Her aide reported. Resistance is scattered and uncoordinated. The hive mind disruption appears to be permanent. They can't re-establish central command. Suman nodded. The war was over. But now came the harder part, deciding what to do with the survivors. President Nam made the decision that would define humanity's place in galactic history. Standing before the dying emperor of the species that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia, she offered something no conqueror had ever offered before. Mercy. The Vorthak Empire is finished, she announced. Your fleets are destroyed, your worlds are liberated, your hive mind is severed. By all rights, we could do to you what you did to 47 other species. Gorthmak's massive eyes fixed on her. Then why do you not? Because destroying you won't bring back the species you exterminated. It won't heal the worlds you consumed. It won't undo 3,000 years of suffering. But sparing you might prevent future suffering. The judgment was unprecedented in galactic history. The surviving Vorthak would be relocated to a single world, monitored and contained but allowed to live. They would be forced to rebuild their society as individuals rather than a collective, learning to coexist rather than consume. It was justice tempered by mercy, something the galaxy had never seen.